evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Tyler. I'm the Vice Master of Trinity Hall. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to the second annual Social Innovation Lecture delivered in partnership between Trinity Hall and the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation. This lecture is part of a broad programme of support for entrepreneurs at Trinity Hall, made possible by a donation from our alumnus and honorary fellow, Graham Ross Russell. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Graham for his very generous support. We're pleased to be able to partner with the Centre for Social Innovation and thank them and the Alumni and Development Office team at Trinity Hall for organising this event, and thank the Judge Business School for hosting. And it's now my pleasure to introduce and hand over to Mauro Guillen. Professor Guillen is Dean of the Cambridge Judge Business School, which he joined in 2021. He's Professor of Management Studies and a Fellow of Queen's College.
Thank you very much. And it is my honor today to welcome to our school, not for the first time, Professor Johanna Mair, whom I've known for maybe, I don't know, 2 years, right? Times 10 or something, for a very long time. And she is going to be sharing with us today her thoughts and her analysis of how to blend innovation and scaling for successful social innovation. She is also a fellow at the Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, in addition to a professor at the Hertie School in Berlin. Thank you very much for coming. And is also affiliated with Harvard. And as you know, her research deals with novel ways of approaching social innovation involving organizations, involving networks. And she has done really path-breaking empirical work, qualitative empirical work on all of these dynamics. And she has published a number of articles, and I guess most relevant to this presentation today is her 2017 book called Innovation and Scaling for Social Impact, which I highly recommend, in which, I think she debunks some of the big myths that exist out there as to the, possibilities for improving the state of the world through social innovation. So it's a truly wonderful, wonderful book. So today is, as Daniel mentioned, the second annual lecture, and I do want to, reciprocate the nice words that you said before about our collaboration between Trinity Hall and the school. This is exactly what we want to do here at Cambridge Judge Business School, which is to build bridges with other parts of the university, as well as with, of course, universities and scholars in other parts of the world. So without further ado, those are the instructions that I had. So I have to confess that I think Jen here is also playing some role, but it's not in my notes. And I just got here today from the US. So I'm going to let you, Jen, explain exactly what your role here is, I think as a moderator, correct? Jen Grenville, who is a professor here in the school. Thank you so much. And Johanna, welcome again.
Here assembled, and especially for Johanna for joining us from Berlin. And I think many of us have missed the opportunity to engage in person with each other. As mentioned, you are a great friend of many of us here. I've used your work in teaching our social innovation students. I'm both a professor here at the business school and a fellow of Trinity Hall. And it's delightful to be hosting this event. I know there are a number of people who are joining us online, and so we will have an opportunity for questions. We'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes or so, where Johanna will tell us about the main content and motivation and insights from her book. And then questions about anything that's been said or anything that's on your mind, please send them in. So those of you who are online, you have the link, and I will be monitoring those questions, and we'll also obviously take questions from our live audience in the room. So Johanna, you and Christian Silos co-authored your book in 2017. A copy of it is sitting here. It was published by Stanford University Press. It's won many awards, but the real motivation for it, as I understand, was based on your experience of many decades studying largely organizations in the global south, very successful organizations that had made social impact. But I think you wanted to debunk some myths about how you make social impact and what the role of innovation is within those. So what really was going on when you thought about, when you oriented to writing this book? What was your motivation? What was your idea that you needed to get across?
Right. So, as you rightly said, Jen, the book is based on 15 years of extensive field work and really working with organizations that address deeply entrenched societal challenges and have done so over 3 decades. And we were very fortunate to work with these organizations for so long, for 15 years, which means that they really opened up to us. And we often thought, like, how can we give back? You know, we write our papers, we produce our scholarship, we use that in the classroom, and yet you're always left with something like, how can we give back? And we didn't really know how to, until the Rockefeller Foundation approached us at Stanford at our research lab, GIL. And they asked us, Christian and Johanna, can you help us to unpack continuous innovation? We would like the organization we support to continuously innovate. And we thought, like, how do we make sense of that? And we thought, do we really have a deep reflection on what is the role of innovation to create impact? So that was a first trigger, if you will. The second trigger for us to write this book was really an observation that we have had for a decade. And the observation was the following: foundations typically gave money to organizations when they demonstrate we are going to innovate, no? So basically, you put innovation in your grant proposal and your chances to get the funding increases by, I don't know, 400%. The second was like funders, for some reason, love scaling. You know? And so, but you know, there are these 2 elements, innovation and scaling, that funders like and fund separately. And the question for us is, how can we, from the perspective of one organization, think about how they relate to each other? How does innovation relate to scaling? That was the second trigger question for us. So these two questions really motivated us to go back to the rich material that we have collected over 15 years. But that alone also does not necessarily justify writing a book, because all of you who have written a book know how, you know, it's a deep commitment. So there was a third trigger. And the third trigger was an observation that we have also, you know, that repeated itself over the decade. I mean, very much out in the field of practice, but then, and the observation is the following. We realized that funders that very generously support social enterprises, social organization in general, you know, they are well-intended and they have very capable people working for them. But we realize they often do not really understand the organizational realities and the local realities of the context where the organizations matter. And it has to do that, you know, the organizations are often reluctant to tell the funders everything, right? They opened that up to us and told us what doesn't work, but they do not necessarily tell the funders what doesn't work, no? So we realized there is a potential gap between, you know, the understanding of funders and the knowledge, the deep knowledge that resides with the organization who carried out the work, have failed to have successes. And we wanted to write a book that connects this. So the book is for funders and for the organizations, for social enterprises. And we had this ambition to write a book that really takes advantage of the stock of knowledge we as a community and generation of scholarship has created, and at the same time is very much practically useful. So that was a little bit the ambition that we had. And so the book is standing on the shoulders of knowledge, not only research that we have done, but, really literature in sociology, in anthropology, and so on. And at the same time has some very practical tools, and we call them diagnostics, that everyone can use, everyone everyone can use to also reflect with people in their organizations on. So there were really three triggers for us to write this book.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is it's won awards both through our Academy of Management, our sort of scholarly field, but also from a more practical audience.
That's
so
right,
clearly it hit its mark. So that's wonderful to hear about what you were facing when you were thinking about it. I think also what's interesting to me is, again, informed a little bit by the entrepreneurship model and being somewhat at the heart of Silicon Valley, at least in one of your many roles. Innovation and scaling can be taken as fundamentally good, and you sort of open them up and question their goodness, especially in this setting. So maybe at the outset, we should just have you define, as you do so well in the book, what do you mean by innovation and how do you discern that from scaling? How do we need to think of those two terms independently and, like you said, ultimately together?
Yeah, so the first thing that is important to understand, that the book is from the perspective of an organization that actually does the work. And the second important point is to understand we look at innovation as a process. So the innovation as a process that runs from the generation of an idea, developing the idea further, to actually struggling within the organization to make sure that we carry this out, to potentially a solution. And the scaling part actually is the part that actually takes an effective product or solution and tries to reach as many people as possible, but also tries to constantly improve the quality of the product and service. So basically it's a quantity and a quality argument. And for us, the important point was to, again, make sure that our readers understand how these two processes hang together in an organization. And as you probably can immediately see, is sometimes, in an organization, you have people that love innovation because innovation is the sexy part. But the blood, sweat, and tear work of scaling, doing the same thing over and over, that is often, not the sexy part. And yet, the scaling part is actually the important one, because innovation per se doesn't create impact. Innovation is wasteful. It consumes all types of resources, money, emotions, and so on. In the best case, an innovation has the potential to a solution, but it's the scaling that actually gets you from an investment to impact. And once you understand that innovation and scaling have to hang together, you also are much more likely to understand or see pathologies. What are pathologies? Pathologies are those factors in an organization that derail you from a productive path from innovation to scaling and therefore to impact. Such pathologies can be that some organization never gets started with innovation. Some because they are just doing what they have been doing all the time, or because it's simply not in their DNA. Or other pathologies are if you have a founder that just loves to innovate, and she comes to the office every morning with thousands of ideas. But that really derails you from never really getting to the scaling part. And you don't really create impact. You leave a lot of impact on the table. So there are different pathologies generic pathologies that we work out. And it's exactly this pathology diagnostic that every organization can use and reflect on their own journey from innovation to scaling.
So that's fantastic. maybe also it's important to sort of point out, which was a learning for me actually, in using your material in teaching again and just engaging with it. You know, many times we think, well, innovation is fine because we can fail and we can learn, but why is that particularly risky in some social settings and in settings where social impact is being sought? Why is it incorrect to take this innovation fail fast model from Silicon Valley and apply it into settings that you studied?
I don't think that we should apply it, quite the opposite. So one important feature that we work or emphasize in the book about innovation is that innovation is a process that where you have to deal with all sorts of uncertainty. And, you know, it could be the problem frame. Do you have the right problem frame? One of the organizations that we studied for 15 years, Gombricas, they do water and sanitation, if you will. No, but is the lack of toilets, is that a technical problem because we don't have really good enough toilets? As the Gates Foundation for years has developed or has offered challenges on developing the latest type of toilet? Or is it deeply entrenched in religion and cultural norms problem? Because open defecation is really embedded in the religious terms.
Mm-hmm.
So what innovation basically does is that it requires you to deal with these uncertainties, as you go forward, you also learn and can reduce such uncertainties. But the problem with adopting or implementing the idea of fail and fail fast in the social sector is that with every intervention, with every innovation, you basically leave a legacy. It's not like the next chip that, you know, just, okay, it didn't work and you create a new chip. With every intervention in a community or so, you leave a legacy, and that can be often very detrimental. Mm-hmm. So very often, for example, if I may use again the sanitation example, and the organization that we studied, it's about water and sanitation, but it works with the community, because the ultimate goal is actually altering deeply entrenched patterns of inequality. So the water and sanitation is an entry point for them into the village to really work with them on inequality issues. But the problem for the organization is if a neighboring village gets a toilet for free, while they ask the whole village to work together and do something, people like villagers would say, well, we want to get it for free. Mm. So there's a lot of legacy effects that we need to deal with. Yeah. And therefore, I often say, like, we need innovation because we have to clean up the things that didn't work in the first one. So we have to be careful about innovation for the sake of innovation. Yeah. But nevertheless, innovation is really an important element, because it also constitutes a learning opportunity.
Yeah. So I think that's helpful to think about in that way. And one of the things that we can reflect on is how innovation, failing fast in a resource-rich environment where the consequences are not that dire. I mean, there might be economic consequences, technological consequences, but you're not dealing with human lives and livelihoods. Exactly. And you're not leaving a legacy of failed innovation or intervention that will lead to lack of trust, et cetera. So I think yet another reason why these commonly used words, especially around innovation and scaling, just don't translate to new contexts. So the next question I wanted us to focus on is actually this conceptualization, or the fact that you point out that actually the context really matters, the people really matter, the nature of the problems really matter. And as you've just illustrated, a question around sanitation actually is embedded in a whole lot of other deep assumptions and understandings that aren't necessarily obvious, and that will change from not necessarily one village to the next, but certainly from one region or country to the next. So what are the different ways, what are the key messages in the book about the multiple pathways to innovation or scaling and how the two come together. So you've said a little bit about Grenville. What are the other pathways that organizations that you studied have successfully gone on?
So for the book, we decided to focus on 4 of the organizations we were able to collaborate with, also because they represent 4 different archetypes of how innovation and scaling hang together. And it's important to stress that there is not one best way how innovation and scaling hang together. It has to do with the context, it has to do with the problem that you address, and obviously it has to do with the people. Who are the people who do things? That matters greatly, you know. And we talked about Grenville's other archetypes, for example, would be the Aravind Eye Hospital, the eye hospital in India that does with the mission of preventing needless blindness, and the #1 source of needless blindness is cataract surgery. So this is an organization that got started after Dr. V retired. He was an ophthalmologist, and after he retired, he started this social enterprise, if you want to call it that way. So here, the interesting thing is that the innovation per se, that the surgery happened obviously before the organization was built. And Aravind is often claimed for being so innovative and you know, our analysis actually points to, you know, gets to a different conclusion. It's very good at scaling, and it does innovate whenever they face a bottleneck of not doing enough surgeries. Then they innovate. So it's really about finding a bottleneck and fix it. So for example, in the early years, they were, it was easy for them to get the intraocular lenses from companies. Johnson & Johnson would give them intraocular lenses. You know, as you all know, businesses at some point might also think about, whoa, they are really getting big and we cannot really afford so many intraocular lenses. So what did Aravind do? They decided to build a plant. You know, they became a manufacturer of intraocular lenses. And at some point, I think they are #3 in the world now, manufacturer. Same as, you know, to again, the scaling, increasing the reach. You cannot build a hospital in every, you cannot build 10 hospitals in Tamil Nadu, but you want to reach people in rural villages. So also here, you innovate around community organizing so that you check patients in their villages, and those that need surgery, you bring them to the hospital. So that's another archetype. BRAC, the largest NGO in the world, starting out of Bangladesh, now operating in multiple countries, and especially in Africa, they focus on transforming the life, in earlier days, especially the life of women. And around that, they basically innovate with all the things that they uncover that women need, you know, education, health, human rights, and so on. And the last archetype that I wanted to share is the Waste Concern. It's an organization that was founded by 2 entrepreneurs also in Bangladesh who made it very clear, we don't want to become as big as BRAC, right? We are entrepreneurs. So what they do, they turn waste into a resource and develop fertilizer out of that, and develop all type of new ideas and technologies around waste. So what they do is that they develop the solution, they tinker with it, but then they also put a patent around it. Now here the patent is not necessarily to capture the value, but the patent helps them to allow others to scale it better, because they have to scale it in a specific way. And so there are different archetypes of how innovation hangs together. The important thing is that innovation reflects on their own archetype.
So those in themselves show different ways of weaving innovation and scaling. And I always like the Arvind's Eye Hospital one, because I think in the book you refer to it as, you know, they're doing a stunningly routine surgery. And so actually innovating on that process, on that surgery, is not the point. And so sometimes, as you say, as an organizational scholar, you have an organizational lens on what works, what doesn't, what are the bottlenecks, and how do we get around those. So two of the phrases that you use, if you don't know how to learn, don't innovate. And if you don't know how to scale, don't innovate. Is there anything else that you'd like to unpack around that connection? And what have you seen organizations get wrong in terms of their learning?
So I think that the sentence, if you don't know how to learn, don't innovate, is an important one. And it goes back to also Jim March's work that we also use quite a bit in the book. And as I mentioned before, innovation is very much a process where you need to deal with uncertainties. Innovation is a process where a lot of things go wrong. So if you think about, again, innovation as a process, it's like a roller coaster. You think you have an idea, but the idea is not as good as you think. Well, perhaps if you really rethink it, it's a good idea. And you are going to try it out, but damn it, the field trial didn't work, right? But hey, there might be a twist and turn. We get some funding. Wow, we can really make this happen. And then, you know, some other things work. It's a roller coaster. Now, this is hard for people to go through that, especially in you know, if you think about a social problem, you really make this work. It's hard. So you easily can get setbacks, especially funders retreat. But if you look at innovation as this roller coaster and look at innovation as a learning, what have we learned? Have we learned something about these uncertainties that I was trying to get to? In the book, we talk about 6, but there are more. Do we have the right problem frame? Will actually the beneficiaries adopt the solution? These are all spaces where you learn a lot while you innovate. So if you turn your mindset into, you know, do I fail or do I succeed, into a learning, look at innovation processes from a learning lens, it helps you to be motivated, but it also helps you to become much better at innovation and in the long run.
So 2017, the book was published, which I know means that you started writing it well before then. And you, of course, studied these organizations, all four, for well more than a decade. So there's a lot that goes into that book. But I think since then, we would all agree that the conversation, just the sort of frequency with which we hear the word social impact and social innovation or social entrepreneurship being talked about has only increased. In the 5 years since the book was published. We have lots of for-profit organizations getting explicitly into the game, whereas the organizations that you tended to study were nonprofits funded in the more traditional way. So bring us up to date. What's happened in the last 5 years that you think is still exciting and relevant, or are there any developments you think maybe this isn't the way we want to be going? Is innovation still learning? Is innovation and scaling still understood with the nuance that you bring to it? Or are there developments that you're a little cautious about or more hopeful about?
Mm-hmm. I think innovation, I think most players, if you will, would not necessarily think of innovation as the holy grail anymore. And I think there's much a deeper understanding of what it takes to create social impact. I think what also is very helpful, that social innovation as a practice is now also a topic that it's not just, you know, confined to the space of social enterprise, but it's in the private sector, and most of all, it's also become again an important topic in the public sector. It's interesting as social innovation in the public sector that also is like a roller coaster. I remember when Barack Obama inaugurated the first office of social innovation, and it was well intended, but it has as a scheme again like just a very simple matching fund scheme, which was limited, but it's a start. But as a result, in Latin America, we had almost every country set up an office of social innovation, each country with a specific focus on what they meant by that. But then, as we all know, when Trump was elected, social innovation was not a topic anymore. And it soon disappeared also on the agenda of many other governments. And over the last 5 years, actually, we have a resurgence of it. And what is even more exciting is that it's a nice, it's actually many different trends come together. So the social economy, if I want, can use that term, is basically seeing a revival. It's especially a policymaker in the European Union, but also in Latin America with the solidarity economy. And it's the first time actually we see many different agenda setters like the OECD, the EU, even the British Council, coming together and really seeing this as an opportunity really to push the needle. What I think is also a trend in these last 5 years, and I'm looking at Ali because he has also seen that in a place like Germany where you wouldn't expect it, all of a sudden social innovation becomes a matter of collective action that really is becoming something that penetrates society more generally. So I would say that the next 10 years certainly will be 10 years of more of a collective action approach in social innovation. And I think that's exciting. Any other trends that we see?
How about business? I mean, because we increasingly see new forms,
Absolutely.
new organizational forms,
Absolutely.
ways in which businesses are having a social as well as financial mission. And should we get excited about that?
I thought we are in a business school, and those trends are all well received, especially as you have wonderful colleagues such as Chris, who is an expert on also the movements around the B Corps, and the concept that Muhammad Yunus coined years back. Social business has found its way in multiple manifestations now, and also in your area, sustainability. Obviously, a lot has happened. Again, I personally do not see the trends in business as decoupled from trends in the public sector. And this is really the exciting part as well, that what we previously, or what we for decades called non-market strategies, and I'm looking at Mauro, they are market strategies. Now they are. So we cannot think about business without the public sector. And for me, the social sector is always the element that actually holds accountable both the private and the public sector. And I think it's from that part, I'm really excited about the progress that we have made. The question now is to what extent the social organization are considered really at eye level. And it was also exciting to see how the social enterprises that I encountered 20 years ago when I started to engage more with the field of practice, they have now formed their own collective action part, and they really want to be heard, and they mobilize. And that's really exciting to see.
Yeah. So these are all, and need we say that, coming out of the pandemic, we've seen all sorts of pathologies associated with the ways that we have been organizing and the separations that we have had between these sectors, despite the recognition that they need to work together. And I guess it remains to be seen how much people will pick up on these ideas. And, you know, we hear all the sort of build back better and all of this. And the question, I think, again, there is, do we want to innovate, or do we want to learn from what has not worked in the past and you know, kind of try new variations on the same? You've written as well recently about systems change, not that, you know, social innovation and social impact wasn't a big enough issue to tackle, but now tackling systems change, and you've got some really interesting and exciting work around that, also reflecting on some of the same organizations. And I think you argue that part of systems change is very similar to innovation, which is it's dealing with uncertainty, but it's also dealing with uncertainty on different scales and in ways that we don't necessarily see. And frankly, we don't train our students. And in general, we're not oriented to think about systems. So what are the things, if you can give just a few moments, and then we'll turn to your questions, so keep them coming if you're online. What are the things about systems change that we need to adopt and learn in order to move forward in this new era that we're in?
I think there are two parts of this question, Jen. One thing is like system perspective, thinking in terms of system. I think we would all agree that that's important, right? Without that, I think we are also not educating our students or prepare them to really see the interconnectedness of social problems, but also aspects in life. But then there is also the other element, and this is what Christian and I more picked up, and what we often do is we observe the field of practice, and then we try to understand where do we think we go overboard, or we might go into, you know, too fast in a direction where we would basically say, hey, time out. And we observed like 5 or 6 years ago that there is an obsession by funders to invest or support systems change. In other words, like, we will support you not just if you innovate or if you scale, but no, you have now to change entire systems, then we will fund you. And that's quite a stretch, no? And so the point is that we wanted to scratch the surface of this, you know, what do people mean by systems change? Because if you really then ask funders, what do you mean by systems change? The answers were actually not very solid, right? So this is again like the approach that we have at Gill, and this is mainly Christian's work, like really going over decades of different perspectives on systems change, and we realized, you know, there was a great excitement about 50 years ago about systems in all disciplines. Everyone was just talking about systems. In the 80s, then it really faded away, and now all of a sudden funders and everyone want to systems change, and we try to again, we are scholars and we try to put our tools at hand, and we wrote a few articles around that, and also try to educate funders to be more reflective of what they mean. Because again, as you rightly said, if you think about an organization changing a system, it's again with a lot of uncertainties, no? And you don't know what you set in motion, and then who deals with that. No. So I think the systems change conversation is someone that I'm also particularly excited to put forward in our more scholarly domain, because there are, especially in organization and management theory, we have quite a bit of legacy and trajectory on that. But the real message here is we should not be carried away by labels and terms, and really try to reflect what do we mean by that.
So just like innovation and scaling aren't fundamentally good, neither is systems change. And I think actually one of the pieces that you wrote in the Stanford Social Innovation Review shortly after the book came out on systems, you pointed that out, that actually systems are dynamic. They're changing already.
Exactly.
It's actually how can we direct, or it's very hard to direct a system. How do you draw towards a subsystem that is actually functional and working, which again is sort of this learning and demonstration based.
To be very provocative, we would argue that there exists no system in the world. No, if you are two people in a room, you're already a system. No, and systems change all the time. No, so do you have a particular direction that you want to change a system to? And yeah, these are the questions.
Yeah, great. So I think at this point, I would love to get questions from the room. So if anyone has a question in the audience, raise your hand. You will get a microphone, and I'm going to take a moment to hop online and check out what's coming in on the virtual channel. So Nicole is standing by, and I don't know, Neil, that looked like a question. Not picking on you, Neil, but.
Is it on? Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I just wondered, you talked a bit about the problematization of innovation, but can you talk any more about scaling, the problematization of scaling? Like, is there ever examples you have of when actually scaling is the wrong thing to do and things should stay small?
So again, you can remain small as an organization and still scale. So for example, Waste Concern, it's not, they don't do much of the scaling themselves, but yet they need to understand how the scaling works. So in the book, we differentiate between red zone and green zone. The red zone is when you're in the innovation mode, and the green zone is in the scaling mode. So the reason why scaling is important is because through scaling, you really tinker with the solution that came out of an innovation process. You tinker with it, but you also learn much more about the people that are affected by the solution. And you learn much more about the context where your solution is actually implemented. So basically, by deeply engaging with the people and with the context, you learn so much that your next round of innovation will be much more productive. Now, scaling is really fundamental for innovation. I give you an example. Gramvikas, the organization that I mentioned, they started out as a student group. They had good intentions to change inequality in Odisha. That was not their state. They came from Kerala. But they started out with land irrigation because there was funding available for land irrigation. They thought, we give farmer irrigation for landholders, and we say, we irrigate your land, and in return, you share the harvest with the farmers who didn't own the land. You can imagine what happened. Land was irrigated, and the landholders, the holders kept the money. No? So again, but they learned about the power structures that are locally. Next round of iteration, they thought, wow, the communities suffering most from inequality are tribal villages. They are really in remote places. The trend then was dairy. Let's bring dairy to today's communities. Dairy is nutritious. It gives you a livelihood. Well, they figured out nobody drinks or touches cows in those villages. No. So again, they learned much more about the local realities and the people. What do you do with dung? You do biogas. So they actually, next iteration was doing biogas initiatives in India. They were super successful. They scaled out to 5,000 villages. They were the poster child of Indian biogas. But they stepped back and said, biogas, we are successful in scaling, but do we really tackle inequality? They were brave enough to say, we are stopping biogas, we are divesting it, we do a spin-off, and we go back to the drawing table. But they learned so much about these villages. They learned that every village wants clean water. No villages wants toilet. So they thought we do water and sanitation, water, because clean water, running water, everyone wants. We couple that with sanitation in order to address the problem of open defecation. But we really get to work with the village. And we only work with the village if 100% of the village is on board, which means that lower caste, higher caste, rich, poor, men, women, they all need to work together. And that really got them going to address inequality. The villages was working on the water and sanitation project. But in the background, you know, addressing inequality was what they are really after. So what I'm trying to say is, without the biogas, they would have never, without the scaling in the biogas, they would have never learned so much in order to actually come to this next round of innovation of water and sanitation. So this is why scaling is important, because you really, really understand people and context much better.
So there's a question that's related that has come in from someone online. So Chuan, I'm going to change your question slightly, but we'll get there. The story that you've just unpacked is one that's very interesting, because it also says this organization was able to detect mission drift and capture it, right? So they could have been great at scaling biogas, but actually they didn't ultimately, and they reminded themselves and they were self-reflective. So we've got a question here about someone who's doing quantitative research. So you're a qualitative researcher, you deeply understand the context, you understand the limits of scaling, you understand what's learned by scaling and how that's applied. What are kind of proxies for scaling that a quantitative researcher might use? And I guess, to be really provocative, is it even possible to create effective proxies for scaling or innovation that quantitative researchers can use to study these kinds of problems?
I almost think it's easier for scaling, because you can use proxies like how many villages you use. You can find proxies for even the quality of a product and service. I think it's possible. It's probably easier for scaling than for innovation.
Yeah. I guess by innovation, I mean, people do measure innovation quantitatively, but if you treat innovation as a process inherently as you do, and if you talk about innovation as sort of uncovering and dealing with uncertainty, then so Chuan, good luck to you, because we need both quantitative and qualitative research on this, but it shows the strengths of the different methods, doesn't it, and the complementarity. Other questions from here in our audience?
Am I? Oh, there we are. Thank you. I think it's a really, really interesting discussion, and very pertinent to some of the things that my organisation is working on. I'm just conscious about the mention of the date of 2017, which is, of course, prior to quite a significant event that's affected us all in the recent years. And in that time, we've seen that innovation and scaling had to happen at the same time. Organisations had to respond very quickly to everything that was going on. But what lessons do you think we can take from that period that are positive with regards to innovation and scaling, that we don't need a pandemic to help us do the next time? What positives can we take from all of this?
Positives from the pandemic. I think the pandemic in different ways has exposed many, if I may use the word again, pathologies in our systems, if I may use that term now. And I would hope that we would take the opportunity and fix some of those pathologies. But it seems that, we are just going from one crisis to another, and so you might hope that after the pandemic, we will have the time for reflection and fix some of the problems that are so obvious. And yet another crisis hits, and in our case, it's Ukraine. So I honestly think that we have to rethink how we have to rethink also education. Education in professional schools, being a business school like Judge, or being a public policy school as Hertie, because I'm afraid we will not get out of this crisis after crisis move. So the challenge is really how do we rejuvenate, or how do we fix some problems in our system? And I think it's not by means of social innovation, but we really have to become better is institutional innovation. And that's hard because we are so used to just let a system burn down and then build it up. And we are not really good in rejuvenate the institutions that make our society and economy. And I think that should be the explicit effort of us also educators, and I'm including myself here. So how can we get better in helping those decision makers to really early enough rejuvenate or twist some of their system, that we don't have to run down a system. But that's hard, and I don't have the solution yet.
So I'm not catching your name, but if I can follow on, and then we'll get the question at the back here. There's a lot that's come out, especially with the pandemic, and a lot of reflections. And I think the other trend that we see is the exchange of information, data, rapid sort of gathering and dissemination and sharing, which I think was one of the things that enabled us to understand the virus and the treatments and everything so quickly. So when you think about your experiences with very localized, sort of settings in which you needed to, maybe once you understood one village and the dynamics deeply enough, then you could replicate the approach in different villages. But now we're in an information-rich environment where things can be shared, both for positive and for negative. Does that help? Is that some of the solution to how we might, as the question was posed, sort of couple scaling and innovation more rapidly and effectively? Or are we fooling ourselves that data is going to save us on just another things?
Data and the way we use data is certainly also super helpful in the Global South and the intervention, and most of the organizations that I mentioned obviously are using data very effectively. At the same time, it's always the question like, who owns the data? And what do we do with the data? So I think that's, or who is allowed to do what with the data, let's put it this way. And I think that's yet another example why I think we just need to let go of the idea that there's a private sector and there's a public sector and there's a social sector. I mean, I deeply believe that we have to have a division of labor, in the public and the private. But in a way, it's not anymore the business of just one sector. And this is why we have to also, in a way, educate the next generation of decision makers and leaders in a way that they understand the mindset, the mandate, fundamental mandate of the other side.
Yeah. We'll get to the question. Yeah, your question. Thank you. Please say your name if you're happy to and introduce yourself. Sorry, we didn't get that opportunity earlier.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Johanna. This is Emily from Social Innovation and Master Degree Study. So you mentioned that one of the purpose of the book is to fill the gap between the founder, the knowledge, how they understand about the social innovation and to the reality. And also, I do agree, one of your papers that innovation is not the holy grail. And you did also mention it is rolling. We learn from, the mistake, or then we come back again. And I do agree. So on the one hand, I wonder, once the founder, either they read your book or they realize the reality, are they lose their confidence, or they're more confident they would like to, willing to change it? That's the first question. And the second one is internally, I know some social entrepreneur, social enterprise, they take maybe decade, like you're starting 15 years to learn those mistakes. So far, is there any good platform, apart from those, literature or books, to share, to maximize the value where they learned to other social entrepreneurs. So yeah, there's two questions, external and internal. Thank you.
Let me use the second question as a segue to my additional role. I'm also the academic editor of Stanford Social Innovation Review, and Stanford Social Innovation Review really we consider ourselves as a platform that allows the collective learning in the field of practice, but also as a repository of ideas. So we curate content. We basically curate content that is written by practitioners and scholars, and Chris and Jen both have also written for us. So in a way, that's also a little bit of a repository of knowledge and a place where funders and social enterprises and scholars meet. And that creates a very productive set of knowledge. And I think there are a number of repositories now out there that try to share that, also all major, I don't know about the Social Innovation Center here, but all major universities that have a Social Innovation Center that also try to get that. We have one at Stanford, for example. Let me get to your first question and what's new on the funder landscape, and that's also quite interesting to observe. And again, it also is often a very US-centric conversation or European conversation. So just allow me just to reflect on general trends. So I think there is quite a bit of awareness among funders and philanthropic organizations that they have to shift gears. There are separate individual movements in that space. One that I particularly like is the trust-based philanthropy that really takes seriously the grantees, that might also then take grantees into the governance system of the foundation. That's an interesting trend. In the US, at times, I think we also might go a little bit overboard at the moment. The largest number of submissions we get at SSIR deal with bashing every single practice we have done on strategic philanthropy and effective philanthropy, the way we do due diligence, the way you do this. It's basically under the spirit of decolonization. And so I think it's an important voice and spirit. I don't think that we necessarily need to throw out every practice that we have, but critical interrogate and reflect on that is certainly useful. And there are other contexts that on philanthropy that are so much basically occupied by themselves that hardly see any need for change. So again, philanthropy is not just this one field, but it's so fragmented and also again dependent on also the institutional context. For example, in Germany, it's a very institutionalized, it's a very stiff and hard to move type of field that doesn't necessarily have so many mavericks or deviants, such as, for example, in the US. You might not always like also, the way of how philanthropists act and do things, but at the same time, it's also they bring in new ideas and remind us to reflect, or even they trigger some voices. No, that's also good. So I think it's an interesting time for philanthropy. A lot of things going on, actually.
That's great. So we have a question from online from Drew. So Drew, type it in if you need to clarify, but Drew is interested to hear what you, Johanna, believe will be the biggest challenges in the development of social businesses in the next few years. So switching from the philanthropy challenges, and maybe we should say fads and fashions and dimensions, what are the biggest challenges in the development of social business?
Yeah, I think we have much more qualified people in the room to answer that question. I would love to also hear from Chris about that. I think for me, it's still the ability or the willingness of, for example, company to get rid of a specific glass ceiling when it comes down to careers within companies that allow managers that work in a social business in the company to also really make it up to the top. I think there is still a proof of concept that companies need to deliver. And Mauro and I often meet in Davos, and it's always striking how CEOs talk as their companies would be social businesses, no? But still, I think the proof is in the pudding, and to see a career path within companies that do not necessarily discriminate whether you had a career in the social business part of your company or others, that I think would be one thing I would look forward to.
So you're thinking about large businesses where there's certain things that they're doing, but it's not core, it's not mainstream.
Yeah,
it's
what was like 20 years
yeah.
ago, it was the CSR department. Now it's typically called something around social business, no? But so I think that development is a really good one because it connects you closer to the core of the company. But I think it's still in many places it's still not necessarily looked at as it was mainstream.
Sure. Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's.
But again, I might not be as qualified as others
born,
here in the room to talk about this.
Any comments from the audience on that question? Chris, since you were singled out.
I very much, of course, agree with Johanna. Definitely, sort of diversity broadly speaking is a huge area where I think companies say a lot, but they actually don't do a lot. And I think that my answer to the question would be, around that sort of, in some ways, greenwashing, company, it's very popular nowadays to say, we're, focused on ESG or, DEI, but actually, if you look inside the company, it's not clear that that's actually being implemented. So I think the biggest challenge is around holding companies accountable for meeting what they say, and how to actually do that is a very complex challenge.
I guess I have a reflection on, sort of the ecosystem, because if we, as you said earlier, different sectors do different things and we need them to do different things for accountability and effectiveness and whatnot. But on the other hand, we see a lot of demonstrations and a lot of movement around things. So we have a lot of social businesses or B corporations or, mission-driven organizations that might have in the past set themselves up as purely a social enterprise, but now they're setting themselves up as a business in some form. So does that give you hope? Are they the ones who are going to demonstrate and push and hold bigger business accountable or demonstrate other ways? Or are they just hopping on the bandwagon of, what used to be just good old-fashioned nonprofit work and making it sound sexy?
No, I think it's a trend that will stay, and that's good, because it's not anymore that we have 5 social businesses and then they're all bought up by, Ben and Jerry's or Burt's Bee, and then, you never hear from them. Now I think we have this critical mass of companies that are born social and that also will remain social, because obviously also lots has changed also on the finance, on the investor side, no? And I think that's really important. And this is why I think it's a trend that you right to use the term ecosystem, because you cannot look at this without also having the finance and the investor side. But I think there is now much more also awareness of investors, not only because they want to do good, because it's also, and it's the right thing to do, but because it's also the future, and therefore it's profitable. Yeah. It's the future as long as we look far enough. Yeah, and every probably out of 10 entrepreneurs, 8 of them already think social in when they think about a business idea. No, I think it's a matter of time.
Yeah, it's the next generation, but it's now. So Anjan online has a question, and it might be semantics. Systems change and institutional entrepreneurship, are these two somehow linked?
I think it would take a while to unpack also the systems change aspect again. Institutional entrepreneurs is also, institutional entrepreneur is a label that we use also widely in the literature. Yeah, you can relate the two, if you will, but it really depends on how you use them as concepts. Now, we often fall in love with concepts without necessarily reflecting how they manifest in the real world. So I think that's important that we don't fall in love with our own terms and concepts, because then we are able to speak to each other in our little communities, but not necessarily to the real world.
I certainly think that systems change and systems thinking has much more resonance out there in the world of institutional entrepreneurship, but it's actually, it kind of makes me reflect, you know, as someone who's been in this field for a while too, and also in an editorial position, we as scholars can reinvent labels for the same thing over and over again sometimes. And so I think we really do need to hold ourselves accountable of what does that actually show up like in the real world. Are we describing phenomena with a new label? You know, systems are cool now, so we'll call this a systems change problem rather than an institutional change problem. And actually, is that the good work
very
of?
Careful. Yeah.
So
I agree.
That's great. Other questions? We have a couple more minutes for questions, and then I have a closing question or two for Johanna. Anyone who's got something that they need to know? Yeah, please.
I'm working on a social innovation project at the moment, and I just wanted to ask you about an observation that I made about how deeply political is social innovation. And what is the solution to this?
Oh, that's a good one.
Deeply political. You know, again, you would need to unpack the political part in your case, because I'm with you. I would also see a lot of political aspects in it, but it could be the politics that relate to the relationship with those that support you and the organization, or it could be, and that's the more exciting part that I'm also looking into in my own research, the really political aspect when it comes down to address a societal problem or a social problem in the context of where the problem resides. Because every social problem that we address has also someone who should take care of it. And many of the problems we address you might want to think like in the mandate of the public sector. No? And therefore, if you really want to address address a social problem in its comprehensiveness, you cannot shy away from that political aspect. And that's actually one of the aspects of my work that I'm really excited about, really to unpack these political aspects. Also, if you think about the different repertoire, we do far too little work on that, on the levers of change that a social enterprise can have. You know, you can think about levers of change or strategies of change, of changing the behavior and attitudes of people as an organization. But at the same time, also try to really do something at this more political system and change a particular law that is very detrimental for making progress on the social problem. Or you can also think about more the lobbying part and really influence policy making. And it's this influencing policy making that I think we are in a much better place today, realizing that social enterprises are really part of that. And we have, together with colleagues, we are observing more than 1,000 social enterprises in 9 different countries. And influencing policy is certainly something that all social enterprises also are aware that we have to do it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, funders would really like social enterprises just to focus on this particular problem. And these political aspects were blanked out. I think today we are in a much better position, and also the assertiveness of social enterprises that also we don't shy away from actually being part of the political game. That I really observe over and over, and I think it's a good trend.
Mm-hmm. So another question has come in from Irina on the virtual audience, adding another dimension to the ecosystem. And this reflects our first social innovation lecture last year, which was with Sir Vonnie Cohen, who has written a great deal about and done a great deal on impact investing. So as impact investors are entering this whole ecosystem, is that having an effect? How is it going to shift? What is their leverage or added value, especially as we think about innovation and scaling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Impact investors certainly are an important element, important actor in this field of practice. I had the great opportunity to work on impact investing with my friend and colleague Lisa Heinberger, and we were able to observe the evolution of impact investing, especially in Europe over 20 years. And it's really striking also how they impact investing managed to really have a big share of the discourse in social innovation, although until very recently they were actually very small in terms of actually the money we are talking about now. And so the money, or the really lever for, if you want to call it systems change, is certainly not in impact investing, and it's much more in the social finance part, which is the getting really into mainstream finance. And I think perhaps one of the merits of impact investing was also that to trigger that conversation, and it has then spillover effects to mainstream finance. So in that sense, yes, it's very helpful. I think there is also a lot of learning going on in the impact investing scene, but what was always striking for me to see is how there are a number of organizations who really lead the field, and they were initially really saying, we want to create impact, and they became more humble and saw, well, we can also not really measure impact, so let's stay with measuring outputs or outcomes. Yet newer ones entering the field, they were caught by these big ambitions to measure impact. So it's an interesting field of practice to observe, where you have clearly some thought leaders and others that follow. But again, my main point is that impact investing will not be the game changer. It has to be mainstream finance.
So again, this question of scale, but also innovation, right? And the demonstration that it's possible, or the push for more mainstream organizations to get involved might be actually a significant point.
There's, the financial system in general doesn't really have a place for social enterprises. Again, if I may come back to our data on these more than 1,000 social enterprises, if you look at their sources of liquidity and their sources of finance, almost no one can rely on loans, because regular banks, they are not equipped to give a loan to social enterprises. Mm-hmm. And that's a mistake, and that's a mistake or a problem in the system that can be easily fixed if you want to.
So we've gone a long way from the book, which sort of fixes our misconceptions or addresses our misconceptions about innovation with a big I and scaling with a big S, and just replicating the Silicon Valley model for entrepreneurship in the social sector. We've talked about lots and lots of other pieces of the puzzle, and it's gotten a little bit more complex and maybe a little bit more daunting for me personally. So just a closing question. What message would you have for people who are either embarking on or sustaining their roles as social innovators out here in our audience and in our virtual audience? What should give them hope, or what might be sources of challenge?
Well, my piece of advice is always like, don't be discouraged by people who tell you this can never work. I think that's trust your gut feeling on that, and don't be discouraged, because everyone finds 1,000 reasons why this can't work. But then again, you have to try it out. And the second is don't rely on recipes or textbook solution. Rely on your imagination, on your capacity to think, and your ability to learn.
It's fantastic. And the 4 archetypes are simply that. They're not recipes, but they're demonstrations of how people learned. So thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable, really engaging, and I've learned so much. I hope that the rest of you have. And thank you so much for participating in our 2nd annual Social Innovation Lecture on behalf of both Trinity Hall and the Judge Business School Center for Social Innovation.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for joining us online and here in the audience. Thanks.
Thanks.